The JFK assassination was obviously a major trauma for the nation, and it is into this situation that Lyndon Baines Johnson steps in. Now, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ as I'll call him from now on, is from Johnson City, Texas, right down the road from where I grew up, actually. And he is in many ways the opposite of JFK. He is an old hand. He is experienced. He had come in as one of the Democrats pushing for the New Deal back when FDR was president. He had been the Senate Majority Leader, and he had been powerfully effective as a Senate Majority Leader, arguably the most powerful Senate Majority Leader of all time. He got his way. He was interesting because he was assumed to be a Dixiecrat, meaning that he was opposed to civil rights and desegregation. But he had a background of kind of at least being around poverty. He had been a school teacher in Texas, and he will turn out to be a far more sympathetic figure to both the poor and minorities than I think anybody would have guessed looking at kind of a brief sketch of his biography. He will accomplish the most impressive legislative record of any president since FDR. Regardless of how you feel about LBJ, he is an enormously important figure. I don't think that can be denied when you look at all the things he accomplished as president. JFK's victory will propel FDR to a victory in 1964, which we'll talk a lot about in a great deal in a minute. But it will also propel Democrats to victory in Congress. And LBJ will have huge Democratic majorities in both the Senate and the House. Combine this with the fact that he is one of the most effective legislators in the history of America, and what you get is a president who gets his way. Let's talk about that 64 election. In 1964, the Republican Party sees a path of victory. They look at the Dixiecrats in the South. They realize that these people are unhappy with the Democratic Party, unhappy with the Democratic Party moving towards civil rights and desegregation. And they see that as an opportunity for the Republicans to grab those Southern votes. Remember, the South has consistently voted Democrat really since before the Civil War, but definitely since the Civil War. Only in really extreme blowout elections, or when the Democrats nominate a Catholic, do you see Southern states vote for Republicans. The Republican Party, and I should really specify here, a very small group of Republicans who want a really extreme version of conservatism, will engineer the parliamentary process, the rules of the nomination process, to get Barry Goldwater to be the Republican nominee. Barry Goldwater is an Arizona senator, and he talks a lot about fear of the Soviet Union, going back to this idea that the Democrats can't stand up to the Soviets. And he talks about states' rights. And what he means by states' rights is fairly clear. He means a state's right to impose segregation. He'll say this, it's a remarkable quote if you've never seen it, where he had this idea that segregation was a limitation, desegregation, limited our freedom, because although he said he opposed segregation personally, people had the right to refuse service or refuse to deal with people of a different race. And that is one of a new definition of freedom. And that's really at the heart of all of this, is what does freedom mean? Does freedom mean the government will make sure you will not be discriminated against based on your race? Or does freedom mean that I have the freedom to discriminate against you based on your race? And so this word begins to diverge into these two different meanings. Goldwater will say this at the Republican National Convention. And this will kind of become stamped on him as a candidate, I think, for all time.
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
things like that, even if you agree with them, really opens the door for your opponent to do things like call you an extremist. And that's what LBJ is going to do. I'm going to show you a couple of ads. The first one is called Daisy, and it only aired one time, but it's probably the most effective and talked about ad in the history of advertising.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
What I like about that ad is that the Goldwater people were outraged that LBJ had run this ad against them, and LBJ's response was great. He said, "I never mentioned Goldwater. What are you talking about, Goldwater? What do you think that wasn't about you?" But of course it was. Goldwater had earlier made comments about dropping nuclear weapons on our communist enemies, and that was what that was referenced to. The second ad is based on the notion that LBJ in 1964 signs the Civil Rights Act, which guarantees desegregation not only by the government and government facilities, but in places of public accommodation. Goldwater runs on the idea that this is taking away our freedom, a business owner's right to discriminate. I want to make it clear. Goldwater said he wouldn't discriminate, but he thought that a restaurant owner should have the right to say, "I'm not going to serve black folks." And so LBJ puts out this ad.
We represent the majority of the people in Alabama who hate niggerism, Catholicism, Judaism, and all the isms of the whole world. So said Robert Creel of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. He also said, "I like Barry Goldwater. He needs our help."
Figured this out yet. LBJ was not messing around, and he wins in 1964 easily. He's never really threatened significantly with losing the election. But I do want to point out that even though Goldwater doesn't come close to winning this election, it is important to understand that it is the Goldwater activist who will become the backbone of the future conservative movement and the Republican Party. So this election, while it's easy to dismiss it as a big blowout election that doesn't mean anything, it actually really sets up the conflict that's going to dominate American politics really up until the present time. Crucial thing to understand when you look at this map is that Goldwater may only win 6 states on this map, but look at what they are. There is home state of Arizona, which is understandable, and 5 southern states. In fact, the 5 deepest southern states. And this will begin the process of southern United States flipping from a reliably Democratic stronghold to a reliably Republican stronghold as it is today. And it's on this issue of states' rights or segregation, which are really the same issue.